So now we have a Photoshop document, which is a document that we need to protect. This document is a full resolution document. It's got all our creative edits in it, and we want to maintain those creative edits at full resolution. So we haven't resized anything, we haven't changed its physical dimensions. So we need to start thinking about, okay, what are we going to do next with this image? Where's it going to output? Now we've done input, right? So we've inputted images by taking them, or we've inputted by putting them into Bridge and uploading them to a computer, and all of those things have happened on the input. Now we want to start outputting, and our output for one was to do creative edits and maintain that creative edit image, but we want to start deploying it, right, to whatever it is we're going to do. So first we're going to start practicing resizing this image and changing the format of this image for print. Now we're going to isolate that and create a separate image for doing that, because we're going to change the dimensions, and when we start changing the dimensions of images, we start to degrade the image to some capacity, and we want to be able to retreat back to this Photoshop document in case we want to isolate maybe one of these adjustment layers, or we want to do something new to it. We really want to be able to come back to it. So what I do first is, when I'm thinking about what it is I'm doing next, in our workflow, we've established that we have our raw image first. That's unedited. We go to PSD and we make all our creative edits. The next thing I want to do is create a TIFF for print, because that's going to be the next dimension smaller than our PSD. And then our web JPEG is our last output, and that's going to be the smallest file size. So we're constantly notching down in its overall physical dimension. So I'm going to save this as a TIFF file under the format of TIFF in my TIFF for print file that I've created. I'm going to save this. I'm replacing because I already had created that. Now I don't want any image compression. I want to keep everything by default here and say OK. It's going to warn me that including layers, these layers over here, is going to increase the file size. That's OK for right now, because I'm going to show you how to flatten those. You'll notice up here this changed to TIFF. Now I'm ready to create these edits, because when I reveal this in my Finder, you can see this TIFF file we're working on currently is right here, and the PSD is a totally separate file, so it's protected, all right? So if I come back here to our Photoshop document, and this is, or sorry, as our TIFF document in Photoshop, I'm going to flatten these layers first. Okay, and I'm flattening those in order to decrease the file size, because it's unnecessary data that we don't need. So under these submenus, this submenu up here where you see these stack of lines, under the layers window, I'm going to flatten this image. You can also find this under edit, actually sorry, is it under layer? It should be under flatten image prior to flattening. It's already flattened now, so it's not highlighted. So now you can see that it's flattened into a single layer. When we do this and then change this image size, you'll see that the file size decreases considerably. So if I go to image, I go to image size here. Right now it's showing our width and height in pixels. I'm going to change this to inches. I'm going to do that because we're going to output to a physical print size, set size of paper, and paper is measured in inches. The dimensions are given to us that way. Now, what I like to do is I like to shrink this image down slightly smaller than the printed paper that I'm going to. And I do that because I want to have the entire image fit on a piece of paper. Now, one of the kind of standard sizes that we do for portfolios in this course is a 8.5 by 11, which is a standard letter size format. With our printers, that works really well, and often it's in line with what you'll most likely see if you ever wanted to have one at home. So I like to keep kind of consistent there. Now you'll notice here that we're close to about 70 megabytes in the file size right now, because we've maintained this height and width of the original image. And the resolution right now is 300 pixels per inch. This is a standard print resolution. This is what the printer wants to print at. So we're going to keep that 300, but what we're going to do, because our longest dimension right now is our height, I want to have a little bit of white border on top and bottom. So what I'm going to choose to do is take a 1/2 inch off of the total height of this, so there's a 1/4 inch of white on the top and bottom, which will give a little bit more than that on the sides. So watch this. Our height is at 20. I'm going to change that to 10.5 because I've taken a 1/2 inch off of that 11-inch dimension of our paper, 8.5 by 11. Remember that. And this width now also fits on there, but it took 1.5 inches off to maintain the proportion of the image that I shot, right? So now notice, it jumped from being almost 70 megabytes down to about 20 megabytes, okay? So if I hit OK, you'll see that it'll shrink here. Now the last thing, again, I need to make sure that I save this. So if I go to File, Save, I'm already in TIFF, so I'm not worried about overwriting that PSD. If I go to Reveal in Finder, you'll notice that it got to about 20 megabytes. The PSD is about 216 megabytes because it still is maintaining our full resolution and all the data that we added to it. Alright? So now we're back here in Photoshop. We have our saved TIFF. This is ready to print onto an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper comfortably. Now, again, I'm thinking about what is our next output. Now, for our course and in general, we want to deploy our images and present them as print and as web images. And primarily, because we're online, it's going to be a web image. So I want to resize this image for web, and I want to make sure that that image size is also, again, at a smaller overall dimension and file size in order to be very portable. The reason that's so critical at this stage is because people want their images to, or your viewer wants to see images load quickly on your website, and if there's any lag there, you're going to lose them. You're going to lose their attention, or they're going to leave your image. Alright, so I'm going to first and foremost save as. I'm going to go back to my organization here of images under this project, and this one's going to be called a WebJPEG. Okay. Now I'm going to change the file format to JPEG, and I'm going to keep it as JPEG. Now you're noticing here there's a before and after. I'm going to talk about this later in a separate video, so don't worry about that right now. So I'm going to change this as a WebJPEG. I'm going to replace that because I already did it before for practicing this demo. And I like to have my image options in JPEG as the highest quality possible, and that's going to be 12. That doesn't add much data or file size to your image, and so I just make sure image is that much more or less compressed or less degraded when you're changing from a TIFF to a JPEG, and so it doesn't really seem to have much consequence. So if I hit OK, now you should notice this is a JPEG, alright? And we need to resize the dimension of this image for JPEG, or for web. So I'm going to hit image size, and now I personally think the presets for Photoshop work just fine. Right now we're in 300 resolution at 10.5 by 7. We're going to want to be in pixels, but Photoshop does a nice job of giving us some auto presets here, and you'll notice we want to be in what's called 72 ppi. Don't worry about the 144 right now. If you want to get more technical, you can go ahead and look at whether or not you want to shift into 144 ppi. Those are for higher resolution screens. But right now we're jumping back to a digital interface and monitor for viewing, and most screens throughout the world are going to be at that 72 ppi, pixels per inch resolution. And so we want to stay within that as a reference point. Now you'll notice in this, if you care about monitor resolution, you'll often see this dimension of 1024, which is kind of a or 768. You see this in YouTube and stuff like that because it's a proportionate dimension for viewing high definition on monitors. Now, what we're doing and the aim of this is to try to create an image that is going to give us a crisp image that won't break down on a monitor at a decent dimension that isn't too big or too small. When it's too small, it's hard to read and is difficult to see, but if it's too large, it won't fit properly on a web browser without someone having to scroll up and down or left to right in order to see that image in full. And that's obviously a problem because you want people just to see the entirety of the image at a decent size and not have to worry about any of that kind of interaction. All right, so I'm going to choose this 1366 just to give myself a little bit more resolution than HD, just for the sake of when it blows up in WordPress. Our gallery options often are to enlarge that image. It doesn't degrade and gives us the kind of just a little bit of extra resolution we might need. And it doesn't add that much file size, so it's not that big of a concern. So if I select that, one thing you'll notice is that I was in portrait mode, right? And so it's going to try to max what is the height of that dimension on a monitor. So you'll notice that it was 1366 by 768. It's going to maximize that height in order to, which is the longest dimension of a portrait image or a vertical image. All right, so I'm going to show you in a second how to do that and deal with that in horizontal or landscape. But right now I want you to also see the size difference, the jump. So it went from 20 megabytes almost down to a megabyte. All right, we're in 72 pixels per inch and I hit OK. It's going to get much smaller on my screen because again I've taken pixels out. Now I'm going to back out of this and go to image size here. So this is my history tab. You'll notice up here, and you go to window and go to history. I'm going to back out of one of my actions here. Go to that image size, and I'm going to rotate this image so you can see how this would work with a horizontal image. So say that I wanted my orientation, my image to be this, right? This horizontal landscape. Now I'm going to go back to image size, and I'm going to again fit to 1366 by 768. See how it maintained that dimension for the longest dimension of the image, which is in this case the width, and I hit OK. Right? So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Save As. It's still a JPEG. I can save it as horizontal or vertical, however you want, if you want to name it or be specific, right? But in this case, I'm just going to put it on a web JPEG. I'm going to save, and I'm going to replace that image and maximize the quality. And then I'm going to show you how it previews. So if I was here in looking at the image, I have it selected. On a Mac, if you hit the space bar, it'll preview what it would look like on a monitor. Right? Okay, so that gets us through this web sizing. Like I said, I'm going to save or create a separate video where I'm going to show you how I want some of your videos or some of your images to be uploaded onto your website that have this feature called image comparison, which is a way of showing me a before image before you've done any editing, and an after image before you've done it, or after you've done some editing. And it in WordPress gives you an option for me to compare the two images. I'll show you in that demo, and as of this point, I think we're through our workflow.